Welcome everyone. This is Bindesh Gundarao here, and welcome to our webinar series of Sales for Entrepreneurs on Pitch Camp. We're very excited today to have Mr. K. Chandrasekhar, who is the CEO of Forus Health, one of the many healthcare leaders that I admire from the healthcare ecosystem. And I've been watching Forus Health, expand and grow their footprint ever since they started, launch their e-Netra product, which is an affordable solution for in their mission to reduce blindness across the world. Before we get started into the Q&A with K. Chandrasekhar, I would like to take a minute to introduce PitchCamp. So PitchCamp is an initiative to help early stage entrepreneurs and sales teams to share their ideas with the world better. We do this through coaching and training interventions. So we help you to pitch better with your investors, and we help you to craft your sales process, especially focused on B2B sales for early stage entrepreneurs. So that's on the mission that we are in at PitchCamp, and with that, I've been wanting to bring on a healthcare leader on our PitchCamp platform. So far, we have had a lot of internet founders come and share their stories, their sales journeys. So I'm very glad Mr. Casey, also known as Chandra, agreed to come on PitchCamp platform. So with this, welcome Mr. Casey to PitchCamp, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Really, it's it's a pleasure to be here and share whatever little I know about what we scale. So definitely happy to be here.
Sure. So I'll run through a quick introduction of Mr. Chandrasekhar, and then ask him to share some insights on what was his process of starting up. So Mr. Chandrasekhar is the founder and the CEO of Forus Health. He's on a mission to eradicate preventable blindness using healthcare technology. Forus's flagship product is 3Netra, a screening device for common eye problems like cataract, diabetic retina, refractive problems, and so on. Their product is now field deployed in more than 2,400 locations across 36 countries, which impacts over 6 million lives. Today, Forus has got more than 5 products in the ophthalmology space, digital imaging and cloud-based portal to enable telemedicine, remote diagnostics, and so on. They have raised over 18.5 million in funding from marquee investors like Accel, IDG Ventures, Asian Health, and so on. Prior to this, he was the director of strategy and software partnerships at NXP, earlier Philips, in the semiconductor business. So with this, welcome once again, Mr. Casey. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
We have in the audience, a different diverse set of people, and some more will join in as we go on. This event is also broadcasted live on Facebook and YouTube as we speak right now. Okay, so Mr. Casey, I'll jump quickly into you. So you started this journey after a long career in the corporate world for Forus Health. So talk to us about some of your background, healthcare interests, and what specifically made you to start your journey in the healthcare space.
Yeah. So immediately after graduation from BITS Pilani, I worked for an Indian semiconductor company, and then worked for the next almost 21 years in different companies in the semiconductor space. Primarily, they were all starting with technology, and then product management, and then business development sometimes, and then last was the strategy part. So I honestly don't have any background in healthcare, or never I aspired to become an entrepreneur also. And even if become an entrepreneur, not in healthcare. So honestly, I didn't have any understanding of this subject. In 2005, when we were in Philips, that time it was still Philips. So we had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Arvind from Arvind Eye Care Madurai. And that is the time when I really understood the magnitude of the problem of preventable blindness, and the emotional impact it creates on human beings, right? So if somebody becomes blind, um, how is he seen within his family? How is he seen not contributing? And there is a saying in the Arabian video which says that a blind man is seen as a mouth without hands. So it's got a significant emotional and economical impact. So, and when we went and analyzed the problem, we really found that for a country of 1.3 billion population, we hardly had like 20,000 ophthalmologists, right? And so, which means the ratio is very skewed. So, and if we go back to our original methodology, which India used to follow, and now probably coming back, which we forgot for maybe 100 years, on the preventive side, right? So we always have focused on preventive technologies, and
Okay.
so the idea was that you can't create doctors overnight. So the idea would be that can we help so that people don't go blind early? And if you identify the problem early, the chances of seeking intervention from an ophthalmologist can be limited. And also the cost of doing that can be much lower. So that was the thinking process. Obviously, I never, as I told you, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur or never dreamt of. So it took me almost 3-4 years to kind of even think whether I should become one. Um,
Okay.
and also, the typical Indian middle class, you don't want to take risk, and that too, you are already like 42, 43, so much more riskier, right? So, and to become an entrepreneur in a space where you don't even know what it is, um, it was not very easy. But I think the cause and the passion behind the cause kind of drove me to get into this journey. So that's been very briefly where how we started.
Wonderful. So, how did you put your co-founding team together?
So I think initially the first few people were from Philips, so
Okay.
primarily known to us, and individuals who were also part of this little bit when we went to Aravind and all that. Um, so started off with that, and then slowly built up a team which initially you obviously can't afford, so you try and take some interns, and then they kind of been in the system for like 1-2 years and they become engineers. So that's how we grew. But the initial team, like 3-4 people, were from Philips.
Fantastic. Talk to us about some of your initial days of building the product, manufacturing, and then reaching out to your first few customers. So talk to us about that whole cycle of the medical device journey.
See, I think one thing much more important than even this is the conceptualization of the whole idea, right? So,
Right.
uh, so one is being very passionate. You get excited, or you get overwhelmed, or you get something bothers you when you hear something, or you know. So, for example, when we see our Indian army men die, you feel very emotional. You want to do something, but lot of times you don't know what to do, and it sometimes dies after some time, or you just go and pay or something, right? So similarly, I would say that when you get into these kind of healthcare problems and you want to solve this problem, it could be first an emotional kind of a connect, right? uh,
Right.
which is good, because that's what drives people to think of something different. But I think what is much more important is whether it is something which you can make it into a product or a solutions, or create a company around that, because uh, it's not just about that emotion or that passion at that time, right? It has to be sustained passion for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Second is whatever the output is you're trying to create, whether it's a product or a solution or a software, whatever, whether that is sellable. Because one thing, you can't run something on philanthropy or something, right? So you can't run it on charity or you can't run it on grant. So you need to kind of create something which will become a product, which will have a market, which will sell, and you will make money and still fulfill that mission. So I think that kind of analysis is very, very required when you get into the first level thinking. So whether, okay, you're saying, okay, avoidable blindness is a problem, so I want to solve this problem using technology, right? That's a very motherhood statement. Now, when we convert that into, let's say, I want to make X product or Y product, is there a market for that? Why will people buy, right? What would be the cost of doing that? Do we have the competency to make that? And after you have made that, how will you go selling that? Do you have the competency, or what is your strategy? I think we need to have, you don't have to have answers for all of that, but at least you should know what are all the potential questions you will face in the next 1-2 years time frame, right? I think the most important thing, especially as an entrepreneur, I think we need to think through of how big the problem is, right? I think if it is going to be very niche, not that you should not make a product or solution for a niche problem, but I think if the problem or the magnitude of the problem is big, then automatically, even if you take a 5% share or 10% share of that market, that is big enough for you to kind of run your company, right? So I think that I would say is the homework which we need to do very, very, very clearly, right? Because most of the time we think, oh, this is a problem and we have to solve this, right? Now, and then we go and make a company. Now, there may be a problem, there may be a solution you will have, but whether you can create a company around that is a question, because that's a big step, right? You'll have people, you'll have statutory obligations, you'll have so many other things. So I think that framework, people need to do it very, very, very clearly, and mapping of the solution to that problem, whether that problem itself is big, whether once you make the solution, will people buy? Because again, in our case, it was a capital equipment, right? So people have to put 4 or 5 lakhs. It's not a joke, right? Will you put 4 or 5 lakhs to buy? If you have to buy a car or something, you go around shopping, you try, you do review, you do so many things before you do that. But so you need to be fairly clear about it. And once that was, we were clear that we can build, and that's also not about just creating that one product. From there, how will we deploy? In what phases? So we will go to ophthalmologist first, then we will go to diabetologist, then we'll go to GP. First, we will contract manufacturer, then we will manufacture it ourselves. First, we'll focus on India, then try and get approvals, then start to look at other countries. So I think we had jotted down most of them well in advance, even before we did the company. And some of them, I would say, also by luck happened. So that was also there. I want to say that everything we forecasted and we did, some of them also happened. So we were able to kind of fine tune the whole thing much better. So I would say that homework is what is very important, which really helps. And in fact, the business plan, what we made, I'm not talking about the numbers, but I would talk about the approach to the business. Whatever I made in 2008, 2009 has not changed quite dramatically even today. It is exactly what we thought. Obviously, the time frame when we initially think is very, very aggressive. It doesn't happen that way. But the approach, the thinking, the way we will penetrate the market, the stages, what we will achieve, more or less has remained the same.
Okay.
That was, I would say, the most important part, which I think we got it right. Apart from an understanding of the problem, I think, see, I told you that in 2005, 2006 is when we got to learn about it, right? So till 2009 when I was in Philips. So we used to travel very regularly to Aravind on weekends.
Okay.
So see, the only thing which was very clear is we need to solve this problem using technology. We never even zeroed in on devices or anything, right? But we still went attending camps. We used to go and see how they are doing surgery. We used to talk to patients. We used to talk to their accompanied relatives. We used to talk to nurses. We used to talk to doctors, just to understand their perspective. Why did this patient come today? Why he did not come 1 year back? Is it affordable? What happens if he loses eyes? How it has affected? So many questions, right? That gives you a very good insight of what we should do. Not that you can satisfy everything, but uh, that that experience which we spent in those days uh, is even though today we are not going and doing that at all to a large extent, right? So we don't have that amount of interaction.
Yeah.
But whatever interaction we did that day, that understanding has really helped us to shape a lot of things. So we don't have to go and validate um, too many things, right?
Right.
That I would say that foundation was reasonably strong.
Fantastic. Yeah, this is great. This is like, being in the trenches as part of your, market research and understanding the user and the patient empathy, the reasons as to why, such a solution is required or an alternate, product is required in the space. Fantastic. So, so now we have done all this research and you've got, you've got a fair idea of, where there is a where there's a space created in the market ecosystem where your solution can fit in. So what happened next? So how did you go about in identifying your your manufacturers, and then getting through the regulatory approvals, and then getting your first few customers on board to really see if this is is there a right validation for the product from a pricing point of view, from a portability point of view, and from an actual end outcome point of view.
Yeah. So I think one thing which we had fairly, as I told you, that deep understanding of the subject, even though not clinically but behaviorally. I think behavioral understanding is very important. How will a patient or a consumer behave? That was the biggest knowledge which we could gather, and then with all that, we kind of zeroed in saying that, look, now if you have to do preventive screening, we should have a black box, and this black box will do imaging of the eye without dilation. Why? Because when you dilate in a hospital, the patient has to spend 3-4 hours. Now, when you're doing preventive care, the person could be in daily wages, it could be in many other things. So they were not willing to sacrifice that 4 hours. And also, 90% of the people believe that they don't have a problem, right? But actually, they will be having, but they realize it too late. So
Right.
So we had certain very clear specifications that this is what this black box should do. Now, how do you actually make that happen, right? So I would say that that was completely trial and error, right? And it was like many failures. It's not that uh, I cannot say that there is a fixed recipe. So we tried many things, we failed many things, and in fact, we never even had optics experience, right? So,
Right.
and some of the tools for optics, the software tools are very expensive, so we couldn't afford that. So we had to, give some outsourcing jobs to some people who had those tools. And then some Philips connections also helped. So there were some people in Netherlands who had the capability or had the tools, so we could get some part work given to them and get it at basic prototyping done. The second thing is on the one thing is we did not rip open an existing product and try to
Retrofit it. Right.
or anything. So we never did anything like that, because primarily we did not come from that medical device background. So we are looking at a problem and we want to solve the problem, and then we reach a kind of 10-20 points which we should do, and then we are saying, okay, this should be that black box, we should do that. So when we go around that, the right thing is not to look at what is already there, right? Because then you start building a ophthalmology device rather than a device which will eradicate avoidable blindness, even though it's more or less the same. When you build an ophthalmology device, you are building it purely for a specialist, whereas when you're building a device with a mission, you can actually kind of deploy. So when you make a very sophisticated device, you can't actually go and deploy it in, let's say, a camp or a community center or anything. So then, stripping the device of its features becomes very difficult. But you can do an upside, right? You can start and then you can improve it as it goes, still continuing it to be a very, very rugged and a high-end product. So I think that was what we could kind of work on. And, I would say that the technical part will obviously vary for product to product. That's very important. But what is very important is we were also able to see one thing which is very good in India is the access what doctors help you with is doing first level testing. So for example, when you have a product, you can test an artificial eye, show those images, and the doctors will be able to compare it with the typical artificial eye, and then you can get some volunteers who will help you to do the first level testing. And given if it is non-invasive and it is not something which is going to hurt, because the first thing you have to do is the safety test even before you put it on people. But if you have the safety test, it will not harm or it will not do, and it is non-invasive. The support what you get from the doctor ecosystem is very good. One. Second is in India you can get absolutely like phenomenal numbers in 5 days or 3 days, which you will not get anywhere in the world. And you also get a lot of corner cases, right? So you will get people with very bad retina, with very small pupil, non-cooperating patients, very old patients, people with a different pigmentation, many things. So a lot of times what you think is, oh, you have done something, you tested it, the 5th patient you can't test, the 8th patient you can't test, the 20th patient you can't test. Then you come back, again you'll have to change, redo why it is not working. So that is a very iterative process, and that is a huge advantage in India, right? Doctors are cooperative. We have huge population, so that helps us to kind of, if you're making a very safe and a non-invasive device, it really helps that we can iterate a little bit. And then once you have done all of that, then you need to kind of go into regulatory part. So one is, we were very clear that at that time there was no very clear regulatory mandate for India. But we basically felt that we will keep CE as the benchmark for all devices we make, and try to follow the CE standards for that. So we right from day one kind of looked at CE as the benchmark, and kept building the quality process around that. So it was easy that way when we were getting a CE approval. Of course, documentation, other things you need to kind of improve, but I think keeping the device standards, the testing standards as per CE was kind of the benchmark. So once you do that, then you asked a question on the pricing part. I think the pricing part was very clear that we knew that if you come at that, so typically those devices at that time, a little more sophisticated devices were available probably at 5 times our cost. So we clearly felt that a price tag somewhere in the 4.5, 5 lakh range is what will be interesting for doctors to try out, right? Because definitely the product will have a certain handicap which which we can only improve, right? But it will, if you continue to make the ultimate product, it will take years, and maybe you'll not survive, because end of the day, you have limited money to do that, right?
True.
So I think so we kept the price point at around 4.5, 5, and our cost of doing that at that time was somewhere in the 3.5 lakh range, right? So our margins were nothing, literally. But we were very clear that we will be able to bring down the cost when you go. But I think getting the first few customers becomes very important. So we stuck to that price rather than generally using the 3x cost model or 4x cost model. We said, okay, this is what the market will accept. Our product will have limitations, so let's go with that. Get the few customers and promise them that every new revision we make, or even in hardware, we will replace the devices. And the first few customers were very, very cooperative, and they believed. So one thing which helped us was that people could identify us, that these people are coming with this kind of a mission, and they're creating a product, because they were also able to visualize this was not like a rip-off product, right? It's very easy for anybody to make it. So this was looking different. Everything was different. So they knew that it was built from scratch. So they also kind of trusted us that, okay, these guys are working for this mission. So even if this current product has few of these handicaps, and given that they are committing, uh, they took that risk, and because of those 5, 10, 20 customers is why we are surviving today.
Okay.
And really thank them, because they trusted us at that time. People can trust us today, but I think the first 10, 20 customers who trusted us when we were nobody, and no history, and why should they even believe us? I think that was very critical.
So these 20 customers were around the Bangalore geography area, or you had to spread out across the country based on the references that you had received? How did you choose your geography?
No, I think see, the first device which we made um, as a gratitude, we gave it to Aravind Eye Hospital on the birth day of Dr. Venkataswamy, who was the founder of Aravind. And because we were visiting Aravind, and we could actually attend a few of the conferences which were Aravind like-minded hospitals, HV Desai in Pune, LV Prasad, Hyderabad, Shankar Nethralaya, Chennai, and few others. So, and they were also people with whom we interacted. They gave us ideas and suggestions, even in the initial phase. So, they became our first few customers. So we were able to go and convince them. They also know that where we came from, where we started, and all that. So they were, kind of supported us, despite maybe our initial product had few, lacunas or limitations. But what we could do was that within 6 to 8 months, we were able to make definitely a much better product, much more rugged, and we replaced everything. So they also felt that these guys walk the talk. So that word of mouth kind of spread, and we could get more customers.
Interesting. So from your initial launch, at what point did you actually get to see that possibility of scale, and getting the feedback that this is really solving core outcome problem, that this machine is solving preventable blindness?
No, I think the most critical thing was understanding that the product will work. So we were very clear that this would be something which will be used in a lot of hub and spoke models, and a lot of use cases, because eye care industry is very very famous for doing outreach camps.
Right.
And they generally don't take devices which are very expensive, right? Because typically in optical equipment, very critical is you should not have a lot of these humps and bumps and all that. So if it loses its alignment, it will not work. And also, most of the companies don't support warranties if you do move it from the place where it was installed. So,
Oh, okay.
so we right from day one kind of focused on that. And in fact, I still remember for us to check whether it will really pass in the initial stage, we used to make the device, put it in 2 suitcases, which was our standard packaging at that time. And we used to take an auto and put one person, and he used to go around very bad roads in Bangalore for like 5-6 rounds, open it up and see whether it will work. And you know, we found it was initially not working. Then we improved that, and then we were able to. So today we have equipment in the factory which actually does this vibration and shock test to know that it'll. So we were able to build new business cases for these hospitals. So we were clear that it will kind of scale. But the only thing which I think we kind of overestimated will be on the time frame. I think we thought we can scale in like 3-4 years. I don't think it is in a medical device. It's not that easy to scale, primarily because there are a lot of things which you need to do. So you have to do manufacturing, you have to do quality, you have to do regulatory,
Correct.
to have roadmap for subsequent products. So you just can't be a one product company, right? So that's also there. And then there is software, and then there is many other things which you need to do. So you need to kind of continuously keep evolving, and you need to also build all of these organizations internally or extra, right? And then you'll have to also raise money, right? Because you can't do this. It requires, I would say, typically it will require like 7-8 years for a company to come to some level and make some consistent product where it is kind of known, and internationally also people will try to talk about it. So I think that was a little bit, we thought that okay, if we make something, tomorrow people will stand in queue. That didn't happen. So I think we need to kind of work through that. And obviously, the other important thing is in capital expenditure. One thing which we have to also understand is, let's say a doctor is there, even though this may be something very essential, he may be buying something much more essential to him. And if he puts in that 10 lakhs, he doesn't have space to do anything for the next maybe 18 to 24 months, right? So even though he needs it, you have lost out on the time frame. So you'll have to have that way, unless it's something which is really, really important. If you're making something like that, then it could probably be. But if he has to kind of a trade-off between buying an X versus Y, and he decides to go with X because that will have a faster ROI, or that is something which he desperately needs, without which he can't do, then you need to kind of figure that out. So I think that will vary from company to company, but I think that is also something you'll have to keep in mind.
Interesting. So at what stage, in this journey, or what are the parameters that helped you to take it beyond India?
See, I think when we solved this problem, it was only an India problem, right? We never aspired. First of all, we never aspired to make a company. We did, and then we saw this problem in India, and India itself is so huge. So, in fact, the name Forus Health was for us. It was for us, and that time it was only India.
Okay.
But what happened was in 2013, there was a conference which was run by International Association of Preventable Blindness. It's an international consortium, and they kind of do these exhibitions and seminars every 2 years in different countries. And in 2013, it happened in Hyderabad.
Okay.
Had it happened in, let's say, somewhere else, we would have not gone, because why to spend money anyway? We're not planning and all that. So when we set this up in Hyderabad, because it is anyway for our Indian doctors will come, so it primarily targeted at that. So we got a lot of doctors who came from Africa and some from Asia, and lots even from the US. And when they saw this and they said, "Oh, we would be interested to have it," uh, that's when we really realized that probably we should look beyond India also, right? We never even thought that that was in our plan. But even our first export, physical movement of our device outside India happened because of our Indian customer. This is Dr. Agarwal's eye hospital, one of the largest,
Right.
the largest eye hospital, I think the largest now
Correct.
in India. So they actually were our customers in India. They bought quite a few number of devices. So when they expanded to Africa, they actually procured devices from us in India, but actually physically took it to Africa, right?
Okay.
So we were also a little apprehensive that how will we service this? What happens if it goes bad, whatever, right? Um, uh, and because it was Agarwal's, we were also confident that if something goes wrong, we can give them a replacement in India and they can take it. And touchwood, we never had a problem, right? So that also gave us confidence that okay, maybe we can take it outside India also, and there is a market and people are willing to look for it, and we'll try to figure out how to solve some of these serviceability issues and a few other things. So that's, I would say, the 2013 IAPB conference and the 2013 and 2014 Dr. Agarwal's taking it to a few countries in Africa gave us the confidence that we should take it. So that's when we started scouting around for international, and then we started participating in some international fairs, and then we got good response, and then it continued to we started selling outside also.
Fantastic. So, just taking a one step back. So, before you went international, while you were expanding in India, initially, you and your co-founding team members would have been the primary, people handling the entire, the sales function, demonstrations,
Correct.
liaising with, the physician ecosystem and all that.
Yeah.
So, how did you, start building your sales teams, and talk to us a little bit about the sales strategy to expand within India first, and then your expansion, your strategies that you adopted when you had to go to international market.
Yeah. So I think initially the idea was that the proving point was that our device is very easy to use. Okay, so we can train somebody who's a 10th grade, 12th grade kind of pass, who knows how to use a laptop, right? And because end of the day, he is only imaging. The interpretation is done by the doctor, right? So, so we don't need specialized technicians. We don't need, because that is also a cost, right? Trained technician is more expensive. So we basically had two people who were our initial two people who were going and making these demos. They were not sales guys. They were only operators per se, right? So I used to have the contact, and then the doctor used to tell me, "Oh, come to Gujarat and do a demo. Come to XYZ and do a demo." So we had two people. They used to go. Now, what used to happen was that in the initial stages it worked because we had good connections with the doctors where we did demo, where only demo was to be done. But then we started going to some of these trade shows, and these doctors whom we did not know, they used to call us, and these two people used to go. Now they started talking to them like salespeople, right? They were negotiation, many things which they were not absolutely ready, right? So we thought that, okay, this is the time that if you have to grow, this will not work. So we need to kind of have a different strategy. So we initially thought whether we will go through the distributor dealer route, which is the standard way. But then because we were doing a lot of concept selling, so we were not like, there is a box which is made by X company, multinational, same name, same thing we are doing. So for a distributor, it will be easy. That box is 10 lakhs, this box is 5 lakhs. So we were not making something like that. We were actually having a concept selling, which is like we were saying screening device and all that. And we positioned this also not as a retinal camera. We positioned this as a screening device to solve the problem, because the problem was always standing in front, right? As I told you, medical devices company focuses on a retinal doctor, so they will make a retinal camera. We were making a screening device. Even though functionally it was a retinal camera, the positioning was a screening device. So there required a lot of concept selling, and we felt that the dealers will be able to kind of sell uh, uh, a product which is established using their channels, not on the concept selling point. So the initial idea was that we will hire our own people, our own sales team. We will train them, and they will go to the field and do this. So that is probably something, the strategy which worked. And today we have like 15 to 18 sales guys across India and our own service network. But then we added a lot of dealers for different products as we go. After I won't call it after they became commodity, but I would say that after they became a brand, right? A brand, then it is easy for a dealer to sell rather than it is a concept. And I don't blame them, because they are selling many things. They can't dedicate a concept selling product, right? So they will always try to sell a product which is there using their channels. Their core strength is their connections, and they can't do too much of concept selling. If there is a requirement, they will be there. So I think that is how we built our sales and distribution network, and that is the strategy. But internationally, we went with a dealer distributor network across the world. So there, we already had a stabilized product. They knew what it was doing, and the positioning outside India was also a little different. So it was positioned as a ophthalmology product with other features, right? So, and we could fit into the ophthalmology ecosystem fairly well. Again, the US, we decided to go direct, because the reason why we wanted to go direct is US is a much larger market, and we felt that it is important for us to have our people, at least a few, to start with, and then go use the dealer distributor route later. But in the US, we established the subsidiary and started selling from there.
Okay, fantastic. I think relatively there's one topic specific question here. This is from Biju Matthew. What have you done to make it harder to emulate your product from competition? Did you file a patent around the Trinetra product?
See, I think there are a few things. So one is a patent, which is basically a lot of hygiene factor, and in a lot of developed countries it helps. So we filed more than 21 patents, and we got 4 US patents also granted. I think that gives us a lot of leverage to say that we are a original design company, right? I would like to differentiate both of that. So I think one is how will you avoid this from competition, right? And the other thing is to show that you have done it proprietary. I think patents are, in my view, are much more useful to say that you are done something original, right? In some countries where you can enforce patenting, right, you can leverage that. But in some of the Asian countries, you don't have, it'll also cost you a lot of time and effort and money to, even if you have to sue somebody for infringement, right? So I think there the product differentiation has to be in your way you have done, and even if they cut and paste and do that, few components, whether it is hardware or some in software or something, is something they should not and cannot kind of replace, right? That we were very clear. And even from that point of view, the concept. So one thing which I have always found is, see, this in-depth understanding of the flow and the patient and the positioning, right? Of a a company which is working on eradicating avoidable blindness and doing things which are connected to that was our differentiator also, right? Now, you can't just look at it like a sheer product, right? Of course, when people look at it as a sheer product, they get the price point, they get those key differentiations. But when people look at it a little holistically, they see the mission behind the company and all that, which obviously nobody, it's not very easy to copy. You can, of course, also write in your website, or you can do whatever you want. But when you go outside and exhibit yourself, when you walk the talk, it becomes very difficult to copy. Unless it is very deep inside you, it kinds of comes out very easily. So I think two things are very important. Both we have to do.
Fantastic. Great. Some additional questions. I think I'll come to that towards the end. Talk to us a little more on as you were scaling. Now you're in multi-country. You're handling with different regulatory scenarios, and you're working with the distributors who are dealing with your products. So now at this scale, what are some of the challenges? Both from a sales and in a sense it's a device aspect of it. So sales and after sales challenges, of managing scale.
So I think one thing, unfortunately, is that see, India is not known for medical devices, right? So just because you made a product in India and it sold, let's say, first 1,000 also, doesn't mean if you go to US or Europe, people will immediately take you. Even dealers will not entertain you, because there have been products which they have been distributing for a long time, right?
Right.
Now, the guy who will touch you will probably be somebody who's also new, right? So when you join hands with a new guy and you are also new, it doesn't take off the way you want. Now, if you want very seasoned players in Europe or Asia to take your distribution and distribute your product, why should they do that, right? Unless there was a gap and you're kind of, it's path breaking or whatever it is, right? So we had this opportunity in a neonatal product. So what was available was probably in India at 1/5 the price, and internationally at 1/3 the price. And it was comparatively more very, very portable. Like the probe what we made was like 340 grams versus the 800 grams which was existing, and our whole solution was like 6-7 kilograms, whereas that existing solution was like 30 kilograms. And feature wise also it was on par or better. So we could use that as a starting point and start looking at distributors who are also big but not doing this product line. So that gave us the advantage of signing up with some of the very big names in Europe, also in some in Asia, also in Latin America. So when you, maybe it is not possible in the first product, but when you build the subsequent products, if you can actually create a niche, then it becomes easy for you to kind of get these distributors signed up. Because in India, as Indian companies, not too many players are there who are very well known. In ophthalmology, we had like one or two who had gone international, Aurolab and Appasamy. So that at least they knew that Indian companies can do. But again, completely ground up scratch companies. Again, Appasamy was a big company. Aurolab was Aravind. So they definitely had certain brand attached to them, right? And so they are different. Whereas unknown company going from scratch and doing, why should a distributor even trust you, right? So I think that it is a credibility which you have to build, and that is also built by a lot of doctors going and talking about your product in the international forums. And again, we never kind of sponsored or did it. We can't afford it, but it happened because doctors were happy, so they went and presented. So that got attention, and that really helped us to do that. So I think it's a strategy. It's a long wait strategy, but You'll have to invest. You will not have too much money, but you'll have to invest small amounts and show that you are present for, let's say, 1 or 2 years before they take you. So you will not get any returns at least till the second or third year. But I think you'll have to invest those small amounts. These are like, you invest on life insurance or things like that. You'll have to invest. You don't have a choice.
Got it. Fantastic. A lot of questions coming up from Mr. Tony Francis.
Okay, yeah, maybe I'll quickly ask. One of the first question is there are hardly 14,000 ophthalmologists in India. From a pitch deck perspective, you would have shown a TAM, SAM, and whatever it is, right? So how did you convince a VC to invest? Because your TAM is only 14,000, and you would have already sold 4,000 devices, which means that you have almost reached your 25-30% of your TAM, right? From a pitch deck perspective, how did you convince a VC about showing that there is a big opportunity indeed?
So I think that's where I said the problem statement really helped, right? So if you make a medical device for ophthalmologists, then your TAM or SAM is 14,000. But if you want to eradicate avoidable blindness, India has 70 million diabetics, and they have to get twice a year screening, which is 140 million screenings. And even if you take one machine, not by capability, but by logistics, can do only 3,000 screenings, you're talking about a 50,000 kind of a number, right? Or you take the other one that even Government of India says that for every 50,000 population, there must be a vision center, right? So again, if you take 1.3 billion population and divide it by 50,000, again, that's a mind-boggling number. So you need to kind of say what is the growth path for that, starting from the 14,000. So you are starting with 14,000 because you directly can't jump into mainstream because you can't go into that. But you have to look at ophthalmologists. Unless they buy, a common man will not be impressed that, okay, this is a good device. So when so if let's say you put it in a railway station, hypothetically, right? If that device was the device which he has seen in Shankar Nethralaya and Arvind and LV Prasad, then there is a confidence for him that, okay, I am being screened in the same device, but for my convenience in a railway station, right? That is very important. So the TAM calculations, whatever we did, was always targeted at the target population rather than only the 14,000. So of course, 14,000 is the first 2-3 years focus, but obviously the bigger one is the larger population. Also, very importantly, if you identify somebody with a problem, you are not going to solve it. The ophthalmologist is going to solve it, right? So when you know, and when you also have these 3,000-4,000 ophthalmologists as your customers, then you're also connecting them to the patients. So fundamentally, you are outsourcing the job of screening and bringing qualified patient into an ophthalmologist, rather than they themselves doing the screening and identifying their patients. So that was fundamentally the pitch, not just to convince the VC, but that was actually the original thought itself. Because only when you screen people, bring access and affordability to people, you will identify cases, and at some point of time, ophthalmologist will be only doing cases which only he can do, and all other things, somebody can screen and at a GP level, somebody can do the screen at a community center level. So that was the difference.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah. So subsequent question. Now, India does not have any M&A or an exit scene, right, where the VCs will get much more convinced that there is an opportunity. Definitely, people are looking at Forus and how is the next stage. So, how do you see from a VC perspective to invest in new age startups, and especially in the medical device space?
Yeah. So first, I think I haven't crossed the bridge. So this is whatever I have to say is based on my assumption. So one thing is, of course, you don't build a company for an exit, right? Or how do I sell the company? You don't think like that. But I think from a VC point of view, that is obviously the question he will ask you, right? And you have to have convincing answers for that. So I would say that whatever answer I had like 5 years back versus whatever answer I have today, probably is like 3-4 times more. And the reason for that is, if you would have asked me like even 3, maybe 5 years back, who is potentially who will buy you, let's say, right? Apart from a PE buying and going to the next stage, who will be the end buyer? The end buyer can be a Carl Zeiss or a Topcon, who was an ophthalmology company, or it could be a Philips or a GE who does not operate in ophthalmology, who wants to get into ophthalmology. So those are only 2 areas which you can think of. But today, we can, because we have gone into services, we have gone into AI, we have gone into digital consulting, lot of other service provider, pharma for that matter. So the lot of identification we are doing is going to help pharma companies. So I think the if you want to call the net for a potential exit is far more bigger. So I think we need to continuously work on it. But I think it should not be that, okay, I want to exit, so I'm working like this. I think it should help you in your business, but at the same time, you can showcase that originally those are people who are planning to get. And also the other important thing is, how important are you to that company, right? In your partnership today. So if you become a very important part, then, and if you tomorrow plug out, then they may want to acquire you. So I think those are things which you have to strategically plan. And of course, I've not crossed the bridge, so it's only an assumption it will work.
Right.
Yeah, the last question. For aspiring entrepreneurs, right? Today, the pre-seed investment scene is very less, right? You have only government grants to bank on, and you typically fall into a death valley with not able to raise the next stage. So, how can established players like Forus help the aspiring new startups? We see, hopefully, we see you as a VC in after your exit, but how do you help today's startups?
See, I think money is important, but I think more than that, there are 2 things which we can do even in our current avatar, right? One is helping them on manufacturing, right? In the sense, when I say manufacturing, there are core third-party manufacturing organizations who specialize in that. They will actually make a product which is very well established, but a startup makes products which will change every 3rd week, right? And there is something called as design for manufacturing, and those kind of pain points which we probably can help them. And the volume will also be very less. They will make 5 units, 10 units. You can't go to a contract manufacturer with those kind of volumes. So that is one area which we can help the startup, because they can not waste their time or effort on that. So that is one. The second thing is, when we are looking at a digital platform, the digital platform now is going to do many things. So we can probably coexist with some of the complementary devices, like if somebody is making a foot care device, somebody is making HbA1c device, somebody is making heart device. So we can integrate that into our platform, and when we go and sell this as a solution, automatically that product also goes. So again, they can cut costs, or at least they can kind of elongate, or if we are able to kind of buy something, I think those are things which we can do to support these kind of companies. I think that probably will be more helpful. I'm not saying money is not helpful, but I think a lot of things, because health tech is in a very nascent stage, we need to kind of handhold on some of those aspects, which I think is very important. And that can be done by a company far more effectively than a VC money alone, right? VC money is very important because that's where you scale or you have some money. But I think these are contributions which we can make even today. And of course, if there are products which will be complementary, we can coexist and try and see how we can be their channel or support them, because we understand this and we are not distributors. So we will not squeeze or do anything, or we will not, we understand if the product has to be made how to make it. We can do a lot of value addition in that, and those expertise, especially regulatory, right? We have expertise in regulatory which we can kind of contribute.
Thanks, brilliant. Yeah, that was my last question. Thanks a lot. It really gave a lot of insights to the way a new startup should structure themselves. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
And
We have another question. This is from Roshan Khan. Is there a cure for lazy eye?
See, lazy eye is a problem which happens. I'm first not a doctor, so with very limited knowledge, I will answer this question. See, lazy eye happens when the child is less than, so they call it strabismus or amblyopia. So this happens when the child is less than 8 years old. If it is beyond 8 years, I think generally the other eye doesn't function. So typically what happens is one eye doesn't work, so that's why it's called lazy eye colloquially, and the other eye compensates for that. So typically the way they do it is they patch the working eye and force the eye which is not working to make work, and by this patching for a few hours every day, you're forcing that eye, and that normally tends to work. I think beyond 8 or 10 years you can't retrieve if it is gone. If it is so, in lazy eye you lose vision in one of the eyes. So if it's beyond 8 or 10 years, you can't retrieve it back.
Okay, wonderful. And any other last questions before I jump in with my last question from the audience? All right. Just before we wrap up, Casey, I want, if you were to reflect back and think on some, things that you would have done differently to reach where you are, or some lessons learned for other entrepreneurs who are trying to start, on their medical device journey. I mentor one of them, a company called Dozy. So it'll be good to hear your thoughts and perspectives on your lessons learned on running and building a device, medical device company.
So I think, see, there will be like at least 100 different things which we did wrongly. But I also take it in the stride, because there are a lot of things which we honestly did not anticipate, but if you want to call it divine intervention, we got it. And a lot of people call it the power of purpose, right? So if the purpose is very powerful, you may get intervention, which you want to call it divine or human, whatever. So I think a lot of this is also a learning which you don't do in your subsequent products itself. Forget subsequent avatar, right? So that learning has one way it is good. Of course, you want to cut short a few of those things which are very standard mistakes, right? Like how do you go into regulatory? How do you certain things, like, for example, even company regulatory statutory stuff we may not have known. People don't have to learn that. I think those kind of things can be very well documented. Some of the things, I think one or two failures also help, because that's where you really learn on the ground what is your thinking and how. Because if you don't learn in the first product, your second or third product can fail, and you can't afford to do that at that stage. Right. When your first product failure, it is accepted. Market also accepts it, right? Because you're nobody. But if you made a second and third product, you can't go and make a mistake in your third product, right? So you must have your homework done fairly well. At least it has to be a decent success. So for that, I think those one or two failures are very critical, and that's how you learn. So if I have to redo something, there were many statutory and other mistakes which we would have done, which were like mundane mistakes we should not have done, which is what I would correct. But I think the product level mistakes, I will still take it, because we made those mistakes. Also, probably we also got certain luck which happened, which would have typically not happened. It is like a fairy tale for some of some things which would have never happened, right? So I think that is what I would say. And in terms of the only thing I would say is the problem statement understanding is, I would say, the most critical. If you get that right, all other things is outsourceable, right? Even technology is outsourceable, right? You can go to somebody and get it done. But I think the problem statement understanding and the solution, the intended solution to that, whether it will work or not, I think that you cannot outsource, and you should not outsource also, because that is your deep DNA and that is what will help you, right? So I think if you spend more time on that rather than jumping with a solution, do many activities, and also look at some non-related solutions which have come. So if you are solving a problem, let's say you're doing some teleconsultation, just as an example, right? Try and see if something else has happened in an industry which has got adopted or failed, right? And you can think, look at, let's say primary care was corporatized, whether why it failed or why it succeeded. I think those are things which we need to kind of think through, because things are dynamically changing, right? So you can't think in one dimension. And I think that if you spend more time on that, and if you ideally have like 2 or 3 founders, the one CEO, if he can actually focus only on the market and the problem statement, it will really help, because the technical people can do other things, but other things can be outsourced.
Fantastic. Great, Mr. Casey. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, and great insights shared. Truly wonderful. Thank you so much, and pleasure having you on PitchCamp once again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, for all the attendees.